I think we're gonna wait. I see her coming down the hall. She'll be right there.
Okay.
All set? Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the May 20th, 2021 special commission meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Betty Rush,
Here?
Vice Mayor Herman Robinson,
Here.
Commissioner Sarah Maliga is absent tonight. Commissioner Christopher McBoy,
Here.
Please rise.
Commissioner Kim Stokes.
Here.
Thank
Please
you.
rise for the pledge by Commissioner McBoy.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight, we are here to hear the case, the appeal by Thomas J. Baird Esquire on behalf of 1920 10th Avenue LLC and by Alfred Malafetto on behalf of Daniel Hyatt and Frederick Schmidt of PZB project number 20-005-00003, which included site plan and conditional use approvals to allow for the construction of a new vehicle fueling charging station, single destination retail and restaurant at 1900 10th Avenue North. This is a quasi judicial hearing to hear an appeal pursuant to section 23.2-17 of the city's code of ordinances. As we have stated in other cases, because this is an appeal, no new evidence will be taken, but the city, the appellants and the applicant will each be given 10 minutes to make a presentation. Thereafter, we will allow public comment and then commission will ask questions. Do the commissioners have any ex parte communications, investigations, or campaign contributions to disclose? Commissioner McBoy?
I do not have any campaign contributions. I did walk near the site with Mr. and
Hyatt?
Hyatt.
Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Robinson?
I've been out to the site with Mr. Hyatt and had a conversation on the phone and no contributions.
Okay,
No contributions or conversations.
okay, great. I have had a conversation with Dr. Klepper, who's my vet. I have to disclose that. With Dan Hyatt. I have gotten materials, printed materials from Mr. Baird. We have a packet that we've looked at, but I have no contributions to announce. And I know the site, not that I went there specifically, but I go there quite often. Thank you. Okay. Keith, at this time, please promote all appeal participants to panelists for swearing in. All those giving presentations or who will be answering questions from the commission, please prepare to raise your right hand and be sworn in.
Keith, do you have everybody? Okay.
Yep.
Do you swear or affirm that in this proceeding you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, say yes.
Yes.
Okay. Prior to making your presentation or comments, please state your name and address for the record. If you represent a party, please also state who you represent.
We'll begin with the city's staff presentation and a reminder that it can be no longer than 10 minutes.
If I can just get Andrew to share the presentation. So just to get started, while he's starting to share the presentation, for the record, Aaron Sita, Assistant Community Sustainability Director. Next slide, please. The item before you is the appeal of the 7-Eleven. It has a very long PZB project number that I will spare you from reading. The appeal is by Thomas J. Baird and Al Malafato on behalf of 1920 10th Avenue North LLC and Daniel Hyatt and Frederick Schmidt, respectively. This application includes a site plan conditional use approvals. This would allow for the construction of a new vehicle charging station, single destination retail. This is what our general category that includes a convenience store and a restaurant at the subject site. Next slide, please. So just some background, the applicant is the Gunster Law Firm on behalf of 1900 10th Avenue North. Again, the address is 1900 10th Avenue North, and the request was as I previously stated. To break the request down a little bit, you have a major site plan for 473 square feet of retail and restaurant building with a 3,520 square foot canopy. The conditional use, this is, we talked about this a little bit before actually in our last appeals, what is a conditional use versus what is an administrative use? So a conditional use goes before the planning and zoning board for approval. These are uses that may have potentially a little bit more impact on adjacent property owners or are greater than 7,500 square feet in size. That's part of why you see some of your residential projects that are greater than 7,500 square feet. So for this particular use category, you see that you have a vehicle charging and fueling station use. This is in our vehicular use basket, our category of uses. And in our use table, we break up our uses into these baskets of uses. So the first one is vehicle charging and fueling station, which is a vehicular use. This is a medium intensity use by size in our use table. The next use is a single destination retail use. As I mentioned before, this is for the convenience store portion. This is a retail use in our use category. And then finally, we have our restaurant use, which we categorize as a commercial use. There's also a variance as a component of this, which is not before you this evening because the variance per our code requires it to go straight to court, circuit court. And I have the attorney who will provide all the details here if you need more of those. And that is for the canopy set back a little bit more. The requirement is 8 feet. The front canopy is a front canopy setback of 40 feet. So next slide, please. Here is the site location. And you can see on the right is the zoning map. This is in the mixed use West zoning district. Next slide. So I just want to bring you through the project history. It's been around for a little bit. So it was originally heard in July of 2020. It was approved with a 4-2 vote with staff recommended conditions. The Planning and Zoning Board in last July also approved an additional condition. This additional condition required the applicant to address school crossing safety with additional signage and markings, and that they were to coordinate that signage with the city, Palm Beach County, and the school district staff. Next slide. So the next, subsequent to the approval, the item was appealed by Mr. Baird on behalf of Francisco Gill. The City Commission heard that appeal in December of 2020. They voted 3-0 to remand the project back to the Planning Board for reconsideration. And then the variance portion was appealed to Circuit Court. Next slide. That appeal is still outstanding, by the way. So in January, on January 27, 2021, the Planning and Zoning Board reheard the application and this time voted 5-2 to approve the application with the same conditions of approval that they did previously. The final order was issued on February 2nd. The application was again appealed by Mr. Baird, and a new appeal was filed by Mr. Malafato on behalf of Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Schmidt. Next slide. So here's the existing, I love these maps. These are bird's eye views. So you can kind of see it in contextually in the development pattern on 10th Avenue North. Next slide. Again, here's a close-up of the existing conditions. If you'll notice on the right, this is a 2019 aerial. So it still shows the Wayne Acres Ford rent-a-truck when it was there, but there's no more trucks there now. The site is vacant. Next slide. And then you can see the site as it exists today, complete with our non-conforming pole sign that says Ford Rent-A-Truck. Next slide. So just hitting on a policy in the comp plan, which is our mixed use west policy. So this policy kind of governs the general provisions for what is the mixed use future land use designation category. And just to highlight, this is probably what I would say is our most suburban in nature category because it is west of 95. It covers more intense uses as well as some higher height limits that are allowed in some of our other corridors. And the preferred mix of uses area-wide, and this is direct comp plan language as in its entirety, the entire policy taken from the comp plan. The mix of uses area-wide is 75% residential and 25% non-residential. And just to highlight, the comp plan also specifically states that it is not a requirement that each site have a mix of uses or multiple uses on the individual site. It is a balance throughout the district in its entirety. Obviously, the implementing zoning district it mentions as well, which is our mixed use west zoning district category, which is throughout the staff report. Next slide. Here is the kind of the existing land use within the two areas of mixed use west. You can see on the left is this is the Lake Worth Road corridor, and on the right is the 10th Avenue North corridor. So the site is located on 10th Avenue North, and it's kind of in that upper right-hand corner. This is the existing land use map that's surrounded by industrial and commercial properties on all sides. Next slide. Here's the site plan. I'm sure everyone who's coming up will get into it, but just for the folks at home, this is what it is. There is primarily the main entrance is off 10th Avenue North. There is a right in and right out only. It's not shown on the site plan, but it was conditioned through the TPS letter for the county for right in, right out. And that is something the applicant agreed to off of Barnett. Next slide. Here is the landscape plan. They have a landscape buffer along 10th Avenue North, a mix of native and non-native trees. It generally meets the landscape requirements of the code. And so that's in for your reference as well. Next slide. There are conditions of approval. They're in your development order. I won't read them, but just so you know that if you can go ahead and click on the next slide as well. And you can see at the end of the conditions of approval, go back one, Andrew, you can see that there is, we called out the planning and zoning condition from the July 15th hearing at the end. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have the applicant, the appellant. 1920 10th Avenue LLC, as represented by Mr. Bayard, and now make their presentation for 10 minutes.
When the clock starts. My name is Thomas J. Beard, and I do represent 1920 10th Avenue LLC. Just a little background on myself. I'm a certified land use planner, also a land use lawyer. I've been retained as an expert to testify in court on land use matters. Some of the things I'm going to tell you are things I have some expertise in. The planning theory about mixed use west, which is where this land use and zoning category is, that you want to have a combination of uses that will work together and in some kind of synergy. Part of the reason for having that mix of uses is to minimize traffic or to capture traffic on the site. The area where 7-Eleven proposes to locate is primarily commercial office, and there's some warehouse district uses in there. It is the headquarters of the Visiting Nurses Association and the headquarters of Duffy's. The introduction of this regional 7-Eleven use into that area with 14 fueling positions, a convenience store, and a fast food restaurant does nothing for the synergy of that area and does nothing to contribute to a mixture of uses that would reduce traffic in that area. Just the opposite. It increases traffic and will increase congestion in that area. I'm sorry. Next slide. I was supposed to say that, wasn't it? I don't know what slide I'm on now. But, next slide. So this is a photograph of the traffic backing up, which it does regularly from Barnett back to the Lake Worth Middle School. Next slide. At the hearing, we presented two experts. One, Dr. William Whiteford, who is a planner was a planner for many years in charge of the zoning division of Palm Beach County. He's a planning consultant, and he's also an adjunct professor at the University of Florida in planning. And Mr. Masood Atifi, who for 15 years supervised the county's traffic division and reviewed every traffic plan or every traffic statement that was submitted as part of his supervisory capacity. Dr. Whiteford made findings with regards to the 7-Eleven project, and its findings were that it was not consistent with the policy, the land use policy that Aaron discussed with you, policy 116. Specifically, that policy calls for a mixture of uses. In this case, the mixture of uses on this site is all three commercial retail, gas station, convenience store, and fast food. Those uses are not complementary to the surrounding uses. It's unlikely that very many of the individuals who work in those buildings are going to go to the Laredo Taco for lunch. It's unlikely that they will be shopping in the convenience store. This use is designed to pull traffic off of I-95. Its proximity to I-95 proves that. And it's on and off traffic, not traffic that's visiting Lake Worth Beach for purposes of contributing to Lake Worth Beach's economy. The city encourages this mixture of use to reduce the need for vehicular trips. That's in your policy. I'm sorry, next slide. I keep forgetting next slides. Next slide. Next slide. Dr. Whiteford also said that it was not consistent with the policy, two transportation policies, one of which is to ensure that the project will not create excessive problems for through traffic and for neighboring commercial areas. That's certainly what this project is going to do. It's going to contribute additional traffic to Barnett.
You know something? I changed my mind. Can you lock the front door? I'm so sorry that I keep bouncing like a fish. But if you can take the sign off and lock the door, you know what? I think everybody that's going to be here is here. Okay.
So that means I get an
You get initial
30 seconds.
seconds. Thank you.
So let me go back to this slide since I was interrupted. Dr. Whiteford's testimony was it violates one of the transportation policies that says that the project shall not create excessive problems of through traffic and commercial viability of neighboring properties. It does that. It will contribute to through traffic on Barnett. It will contribute to further backups on Barnett. It does contribute to difficulty with a left turn movement from Barnett onto 10th Avenue North going eastbound. The other policy that was discussed had to do with the heavy traffic that is to be discouraged in this area, and careful consideration, this is not on this slide, careful consideration that the commission is to give, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is to give to any particular project that comes in. And it says when you have a heavy traffic generating use, that heavy traffic generating use must be given careful consideration. Careful consideration was not given to this use. Careful consideration wasn't given at the first hearing. Mr. Hyatt, Mr. Gill, Mr. Schmidt testified about the problems that their businesses will have because of the existing traffic and the contributing traffic. They all testified that it would be a problem. Despite that, the project moved on. The second time it came back in January, having heard that testimony, what they got from the Planning and Zoning Commission the second time around was basically lip service. It was the same approval, 4-2, same people voting. I think there was no one new member. Next slide. This is not corresponding slides. I'm just going to go through it, and the slide operator can just flip through. This does not meet the site plan criteria either, nor does it meet the criteria of the conditional use. The reason it doesn't meet the conditional use criteria is because of the traffic congestion that will occur. There's a specific criteria in there that addresses that. It also doesn't meet the criteria for the conditional use because it won't meet the setbacks. There wasn't any testimony the second time around about the variance. The variance has to be part of the site plan. There was no testimony. Instead, the idea was we're going to rely on our previous approval from July 15, 2020, and take that into consideration. However, that was up on appeal with the circuit court. So there was no evidence before them in regards to the variance and whether or not the fuel canopy could meet the setbacks. This slide, Mr. Atifi and his expert testimony, his testimony was based on the traffic report by 7-Eleven's expert. That traffic report concluded, and Mr. Atifi concluded, that this intersection would fail. The intersection being Barnett and 10th Avenue Newark. You've seen the slide about the traffic backing up. He also testified about how unsafe this intersection is. The testimony was that there are 69 crashes at this intersection in 3 years. 69 crashes, and that included a COVID year, 2020. Next slide. There's the slide that shows the traffic data that was collected by Mr. Atifi. He testified to make this safe, next slide, to make this safe, a turn lane would be needed on the 7-Eleven property. However, no turn lane is being proposed and no condition is being proposed to require that turn lane. So without the turn lane, you have an unsafe intersection. That's what the Planning and Zoning Board approved. Next slide. This shows the turn lane and the 15-foot right-of-way to accommodate that turn lane. So next slide. So here's the legal consequences as I see it in regards to the Planning and Zoning Board's approval. They approved something that's not consistent with your comprehensive plan. 2 policies of the transportation element and 1 land use policy. Florida law holds, there's 2 statutes that are up there, that you cannot approve a development order if it's not consistent with the policies of your comprehensive plan. So I submit to you that because it's not consistent with your comprehensive plan, you shouldn't approve the Planning and Zoning Board's decision to approve the conditional use site plan application of 7-Eleven. The approval, these businessmen that are the subject of this appeal have spent a lot of money on lawyers because this area is important to them. They have an investment there. They have tenants there. They have tenants who are subject to the same traffic and the same traffic congestion. What they're faced with is the potential of this.
The 10 minutes have expired.
Slide.
You're pretty much done. You just want to wrap up?
Okay, yeah, next slide.
Well,
That's my recommended motion to you.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Do we have a printout of that PowerPoint here? Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Okay. The appellants Dan Hyatt and Frederick Schmidt, as represented by Mr. Malafato, may now make their presentation for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. I'm Danielle Malafato. I represent Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Schmidt, as just indicated, and with the law firm of Lewis, Longman and Walker in West Palm Beach. Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Schmidt are the owner of the commercial business property directly east across Barnett Drive at 1847 Aragon Avenue, where they've proposed 7-Eleven. My clients oppose this project because it is not compliant with the city's comp plan, the mixed use policy as explained by Mr. Baird, as well as the traffic policies, and that it will as a result, there will be the reason they don't comply with the mixed use is despite staff's distinction or try to distinguish gasoline vehicular use. It's just a gas station. It's going to have a restaurant there, which is also retail use, and it'll have a commercial convenience store. So really, it's all one use. It's not a mixed use. So that's, if it's not to the letter of the comp plan, it certainly violates the intent of that comp plan. There's not going to be any residential, any office, any other type of use provided at this site. And additionally, my clients are concerned about the great deal of traffic that's going to be added to an already overcrowded 10th Avenue North. Again, contrary to the to your comprehensive plan traffic policies. As well as we've discussed, it's going to put at risk the students from Lake Worth Middle School, which is right up the road. Could I see the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, policy 2.143, and I'm mostly going to focus on traffic, and this was all testified to by Mr. Atifi at the prior hearing. The intersection of 10th Avenue North and Barnett Drive is not a major intersection, yet these type of approvals are supposed to be focused on major intersections. Barnett Drive provides direct access to Lake Worth Middle School, as I said, so you got a risk with the students. And as Mr. Baird indicated, the policy requires careful consideration, and this is important, which is why I'm repeating it, careful consideration of the introduction of high-intensity vehicular use in a particular area. We must seriously question, with all due respect to staff, whether they actually gave careful consideration to this use and whether or not the Planning and Zoning Board gave careful consideration, because I would put to you that if they did, they would have recommended denial. Next slide, please. Also, policy 2.1.4.3 indicates that traffic generating land uses such as that proposed by the 7-Eleven should be carefully considered before permitting along 10th Avenue North immediately west of I-95. That's pretty specific, and that's exactly where we are. This careful consideration was not done. The proposed 7-Eleven will create level of service F conditions, and this is also from Mr. Tepe's testimony, at the intersection of 10th Avenue North and Barnett. Level of service F is the lowest, as you might know, is the lowest condition available. Next slide. Now, policy 2.1.4.7 states, the city shall encourage the development of mixed-use development to reduce the need for vehicular trips. Well, this does not reduce the need for vehicular trips at all. If it's considered to be mixed use, which again, we doubt and we question, the mixed use development in urban areas typically include residential component. There's no residential component here. We understand staff's position is that, well, you have to look at the area as a whole. I don't know how far residential is from here, but it's not right by, nearby. And mixed use development generally consists, as I said, of two more distinct types of uses: residential, office, industrial, or some combination thereof. Again, our position is the use here is singular, it's only retail, commercial retail. Next slide. For the reasons I just stated, because there's no mix in uses, there is really, this project is, again, Mr. Bad indicated, and I would like to say for the record, we adopt and agree with all of his arguments. The proposed project is not consistent with the policy and the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. The information presented by staff and the applicant focused on policy 1.1.1.6 to support the conclusion the application is consistent with the comp plan. And that's what they really rely on the most. But the intent of that policy is to promote development with a mix, again, of two or more distinct uses in the area west of I-95 and 10th Avenue. That's not what happened here. The proposed development consists of three repetitive types of uses as demonstrated by the traffic analysis. Next slide. You can skip this one. Go to the next slide, please. The preferred mix of uses area-wide is 75% residential and 25% non-residential. Again, I'm quoting from the comp plan. The intent of the policy, as I said, is to have a mix of uses that is primarily residential. We don't see anything like that here. To accept the interpretation that the repetitive types of commercial uses undermines the purpose and intent of the mixed-use West land use category. The development and redevelopment goals established by the city and the design guidelines adopted by the city for this area are completely opposite what's being proposed. The proposed 7-Eleven, you can go to the next slide, please. The proposed 7-Eleven is a heavy traffic generating land use as defined by the city's LDRs. According to the city's comp plan, heavy traffic generating land uses shall be carefully considered, again, the careful consideration before permitting along 10th Avenue North immediately west of I-95. Vehicle charging and fueling stations such as that proposed at 7-Eleven are high intensity vehicular uses according to the city's code. Next slide. As I said earlier, the intersection on 10th Avenue North and Barnett Drive is not a major intersection. You've seen the traffic backing up on Barnett on the current conditions. Barnett provides direct access to Lake Worth Middle School, which again could put the students at risk. The proposed 7-Eleven will be detrimental to the longstanding businesses in the city of Lake Worth Beach, like my clients and like Mr. Baird's clients. Is that a is that a policy that you as representatives of citizens of this city want to promote to allow a new business to come in while adversely affecting the existing businesses that have been here for such a long time? And with that, I'll close. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have questions a little bit later.
Okay.
Now, the appellee will come up and make, as represented by Brian Seymour, may now make their 10-minute presentation.
Madam Mayor, Commission, it's nice to see you. I forgot my protein bar tonight, so I'm going to really try to keep this to that 10-minute time frame. I am here on behalf of 7-Eleven. We have a property owner, Mr. Zambrana, as well. Brandon Wolf from 7-Eleven is online. Shane Laxo, Josh Long, and Lisa Bernstein are all here with us. Shane is with Creighton Construction, the developer. Josh is an AICP planner who is the project planner who testified at the hearing. Ms. Bernstein is a professional engineer, the only professional engineer licensed in the state of Florida that testified on the issues of traffic. She's a traffic engineer. We also have Mark Grimback with Keith Engineering, who is online. So can we go to the next slide, please, Andrew? We have this is a very brief overview. You've seen some of this. We're located at the northwest corner of Barnett and 10th within that mixed use West zoning district that you heard a lot about. You're going to hear even more about as I go through. It's a little bit of an older site. It needs to be fixed up. Aaron showed you some of what's going to happen with some of the significant upgrades. Next. We talked a little bit about the approvals. Again, this is only major site plan and conditional use. The reason the variance wasn't discussed is because it had been approved. It has remained approved. It has not been overturned. And so it is in place. So that's why it wasn't discussed and is not an issue here tonight. The approvals did provide for those 3 uses that you heard about. Next slide. So we've been at this for about 1.5 years. Just to be clear, we've been at this for about 1.5 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of that because careful consideration doesn't mean agree with the objectors. Careful consideration means carefully consider, not do what they want you to do. And what you can see here is that even before we filed an application, we came in to talk to your staff, work with them so that once we got an application filed, it was something that can move along. So then we had our formal application process, and then ultimately in July of last year, after a very lengthy planning and zoning board hearing, that the project was approved. Then came back to City Commission for another hearing. There was a split between the 3 commissioners. Now, Mayor Trulio at the time had to recuse herself. There were 3, your charter requires 3 votes. They could not agree. 2 were for the approval, 1 was against the approval. So They came to a mediated, effectively amongst themselves, agreement, send it back for yet another hearing. So we went back and had another very lengthy hearing. Then it was approved again. Just because they don't like it doesn't mean that it wasn't considered. There were hours of testimony. There were, I think, over 30 minutes of questions from the board just about traffic. So we got there, and now here we are again at our fourth hearing. So really quickly on the approved plans, if you go to the next slide, and if you want to just click through the clicks, there are, I think, 3 of them. This is the site plan, and there's a couple things. That red line that you see is the current curb line. That's where the property line ends right now. There is no access to 10th Avenue. There is no right turn lane. The green line that you see now is where the new curb line is going to be, adding an access onto 10th and putting in a right turn lane so those vehicular trips come off of 10th Avenue North before they go into the site, which of course has a significant impact on Barnett as well, because not every single car has to go onto Barnett as they would now. And then what you see on the top there in green is what Aaron talked about, which is the condition that it will be a right in, right out only. So you're not going to get backups from people trying to make the left onto Barnett. So those are important elements of the actual site plan that we're talking about, because the current traffic conditions don't include any of that. No right turn lane, no access onto 10, no ability to stop left turns. None of that exists today. All of that will exist with this particular proposal. Next slide, please. So the appeal is limited tonight. And it's interesting to me, and of course I understand why. It was as though in the previous 2 presentations, no one else spoke at the hearing. And it was only testimony that didn't support the P&Z. There was significant testimony that did. And that's actually what the question is tonight. This has to be considered based on actual law, not theory, not what's typical, but your actual regulations and the actual evidence of what was done at the hearing, including the consideration and the questions that were asked and answered, some of which I'm going to get into in just a second. And I'm going to go through the issues that are raised here. But first is that standard of review. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is important. This is not a question of reweighing evidence. This is a question of, is there enough evidence to support the decision? And it's not about whether anyone agrees or disagrees. It's simply a function of, was there enough? And there is more than enough. So I'm going to start with policy 1.1.1.6. If you can go to the next slide. The only way you could find that policy 1.1.1.6 was violated is to simply ignore language, which is what Dr. Whiteford did, which is what you just heard. Now, Mr. Baird, to his Mr. Malfado, to his credit, used the phrase area-wide, but then ignored the phrase area-wide. This is not a site-by-site mix of uses. So even if you buy that they're not 3 different uses, though they are specifically identified as 3 separate uses in your code, but even if you buy that, that doesn't violate the comprehensive plan. They're right. You have to read and apply your regulations just as they're written. But they don't actually do that. And so Mr. Whiteford's entire testimony was based on ignoring the language in the comprehensive plan itself. It is not a requirement that each site within the category incorporate multiple uses. Now, of course, per your regulations, they are multiple uses, and Aaron talked about that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. But ultimately, there was also testimony from Mr. Waters. Mr. Waters drafted this language, and he told the P&Z board what it meant and what it was intended, and it was intended just as it's written. Can we go to the next slide? So they try to scare you with traffic without talking about all of the things that were done to offset the traffic impacts. And they use false information and testimony from someone who is not a professional engineer. They did not bring a traffic engineer. They brought someone who used to review traffic studies. We brought a professional engineer who signed and sealed with her license a traffic study that would happen. So let's look at the actual language of policy 2.1.4.7, which again does not require a mix of uses on any individual site. It does talk about a mix of uses being encouraged, And again, by your code, your regulations, not planning theory, not what they would like, not what anyone may or may not like, but by your code are in fact 3 distinct uses. So the purpose is to reduce the need for vehicular trips. The evidence that actually was presented shows that that happens. Because Ms. Bernstein testified, and this is not me talking, I'm gonna give you what Ms. Bernstein talked about. How this whole traffic works. One of the major things is she talked about pass-by trips. And what pass-by trips are trips already on the road that are going to then go into the site. Palm Beach County in their study says you cannot consider more than 61% pass-by trips with the gas station. So she took it and took that 61% as pass-by trips. So more than half of the vehicles associated with the traffic here are already there. Now, in reality, she testified as well that the Department of Transportation did a study and it's probably more like 78%. But at the peak hour when the traffic is its highest, if you did 78%, it comes out to about 18. But even if you take the conservative estimate, you're talking about 22 trips east, 22 trips west. That's it. Everything else is already on the road. Those are the only new trips. And she testified, again, with her license, her expertise as a professional engineer, that there's very little traffic. And again, because of the changes to 10th Avenue, most of that traffic gets taken off of Barnett that currently backs up. And looking at the surrounding area, of course, people are going to walk. You might remember you approved the new residential community down the street. I remember. And those people can easily walk. That's not 3 miles away. That's down the street. There are people that work here that can easily walk to pick up a taco. Delicious tacos. I haven't had one. That's Brandon Wolf's exact quote. They are delicious tacos. And they can get any convenience items that they may need. So that is a critical part of an urban neighborhood, of this neighborhood, and it does take those trips off the road. What's interesting is that if you look at your regulations and you compare to what's done, this is only 4% of what could be developed on this site by your regulations. So far less than could have been done. That was the evidence that was testified to. Again, Mr. Atifi, they talked about the level of service F. Mr. Atifi relied on a traffic study that was not actually the traffic study that was approved by the county. So what they talk about the traffic study and level of service F, the approved traffic study that was approved by professional engineers.
Your 10 minutes has passed.
So you have the exact same, if I can just sum up real quick. You have the exact same level of service before and after. Now, the only other issue is the mixed use West zoning district. And of course, that's exactly the same as.
Sir, the 10 minutes is up.
Yes, ma'am. That was exactly the same. And I appreciate your time. We have our witnesses here and able to answer any questions you may have.
But no new evidence.
No new evidence. I also have, by the way, I sent you all
Okay,
the letter.
we're really done now.
Did they get my letter?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I put this into the record,
Sure.
just in case you didn't get it.
Do we have any, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment cards?
I do not, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any blue cards from the public here tonight?
No, Madam Mayor.
Oh, my goodness, okay. Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions for the staff, the applicant, either of the appellants? And please we have to bear in mind that we can ask for clarifications on what happened below, but we cannot ask or consider any new evidence. Does anyone have a question of anybody? Let's just start with the presenter, the property owner, Mr. Seymour. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Seymour? Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Malafato? Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Bayard
I have
or staff?
I just have questions about the conflicting traffic studies. So I'm not sure who that goes to or what. Seems like the best way.
Well, I'm sure everyone would love a little to address that. I'm sorry.
The traffic engineer is here if you have questions
Okay.
about this study.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, 11.
Right, I understand. that. Thank you. Why don't we ask staff? I think that'd be the neutral.
I'm just, well, based on this, 61% or more are passed by trips. So just like, would love to know how we arrive at that. How do we know that? You know, like how do we arrive at that figure? And then we hear other testimony that this, you know, and common sense tells you, yeah, a gas station off of an interstate. I'm sure there's going to be signage on the interstate, maybe, so the 7-Eleven seal, like exit here to come to 7-Eleven. So it does seem like it would pull traffic off the interstate. So I just want some more clarification about those numbers, I guess.
Would someone like to address that? But I would ask I would not ask for, yeah, I'm sorry.
Not Mr. Baird.
I'm sorry.
There's only one person qualified to answer that question, is the person who did the study.
Thank you, Mr. Seymour, for your opinion about that. We're going to take a little bit of, just everyone's going to get a little chance to answer. Briefly, do you have a response to that question? I mean, very briefly.
Yes,
Okay.
the traffic study does show that there are trips generated by this project. Those trips are going to come primarily from traffic off of I-95. So to suggest that all of this traffic is just traffic that's already there is,
Okay. And what are you basing that on, Mr. Baird?
I'm basing that on the testimony that was provided in the traffic report below
Mhm.
and the testimony of the traffic planners who testified.
Okay. And the people that testified below were traffic, talk about their,
One was a transportation planner, Mr. Atifi.
Mhm.
The other was a traffic engineer.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Mr. Seymour?
So I can answer the question, but you have the engineer here, so I'm gonna let her talk about her
Is
study.
that okay?
She can answer
Christine,
questions about her study.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'm looking for you.
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at you for guidance. I don't have my glasses on.
Good evening, Mayor.
Hi, thank you.
I'm Lisa Bernstein. I'm a professional engineer. I've specialized in traffic for over 35 years. The traffic studies when submitted are based on the different designs of the project, and if they change, then I have to revise the study. The traffic study was originally done in May, and then they changed aspects of the site. So I redid it in July of 2020 as well. So that's why you'll see there's an older study, an older version, and then a revised version. It is the revised version that was approved by Palm Beach County Traffic with my approved TPS letter. So when you do distribution for traffic coming into like a neighborhood 7-Eleven, yes, there will be some traffic coming off of 95, but a lot of it will come from East and West 10th. A very small amount came from Barnett. It's based on an all over area-wide numbers of traffic that are currently on the road. And then you kind of develop a distribution where you think traffic is going to come. But as stated, the pass-by, which is vehicles already on the road, you don't sit out in the morning to go to 7-Eleven. You're on your way to work, you'll stop in and get a cup of coffee, and then you're going to continue on your way to your primary trip, which is either your work or on your way back would be your home. So it's just a part of your major trip. So for a gas station convenience store, Palm Beach County allows a 61% pass-by, which is what you take off of your total trips generated by the site. Now, since the site was only a truck rental, it didn't get a lot of credit for existing use. So all of the traffic was technically, we didn't get any credit for that, what was there. So what was new, we took that total and then I deducted the 61%, which left what was net new. And that's what the new traffic would be pulling in that wasn't already on, it was not there from the site as it was before.
I missed a couple words and that made me.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's okay.
Added to, was it number count, traffic counts that you did? I'm looking
No.
at how you got to the number.
The trips generated by the site are done by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. There's a trip generation manual that has studied sites all over the country for many years to see what kind of traffic they get. More sites have more studies, convenience stores have been thoroughly studied. And then when the DOT did their study about convenience stores to determine pass-wide for Florida, they did come up with that higher percentage of 78% of the trips that go to these these uses are already on the road.
And when you say convenience store, that includes gas pumps?
Yes, a convenience store, gas station. For example, like a residential use has 0 pass by. You don't just drive down the road and decide to pull into somebody's home. And an office has about a 10% pass by because you don't typically go to an office on your way home. You know, you have an appointment or you're going to see someone. So they give it a 10% pass by. So it's very low. So those generate a lot more trips per the square footage or number of units. So for the gas station, most everybody's on the road. When I do my study, I'm a little conservative. So if I have, 40, we'll just do even, 50% and 50% coming from either direction, I assign them to the site and then I assign them back, just to be conservative. When in reality, they're probably heading this way. They're going to come in and they're going to continue heading that way. I try to make it more conservative. So I get like I said, I like to be conservative. So there's no errors.
I have a question. In terms of eastbound morning traffic, you mentioned getting coffee and going to work. Okay. And I do travel that, pretty familiar with that. Eastbound, left-hand turn across 2 lanes of 10th Avenue North traffic. How do you imagine that happening in any sort of?
Well, they will get a break when the light turns red. And there is I believe there is a dual left turn lane running down the middle of 10th. So when the light turns red at 10th and Barnett, the traffic is going to stop coming in the westbound direction. And the traffic heading north and south on Barnett is very low for in the morning. No.
When the school is in session?
Well, we're talking 7 to 9 is what they consider the AM peak hour.
Right.
So when you would come in, you could get in, and then you could come out and turn left on Barnett back out.
That also this, I'm sorry, I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm really trying to get wrap
No,
my head
that's
around
okay.
this.
The morning peak is lower than the afternoon peak.
Lowering numbers of cars?
Yes.
Okay. But isn't that also the same time that the children are approaching school, coming to school?
Actually, they're the same. They're the same. Well, the school is in, well, the school comes in, I know from the buses, don't they come around that one loop there? There's a road in front of the school.
But they have to go up Barnett Drive to get there.
Okay.
I'm sorry? They go Detroit.
Yes, because there's a one-way fenced off road that comes up Detroit and goes in front of the school for access, and then it would come down Barnett.
But the buses would come down Barnett. Do the buses come down Barnett?
On
the way out,
it's-
right, okay.
Right.
And Barnett,
I mean, you're hearing, we were told there would be no new testimony tonight. You're hearing testimony. Had we known you were going to consider testimony, we would have had our experts here to address the same issues she's now addressing.
I think we're just asking for clarification. I turn to my attorney.
Certainly, the traffic study was presented below.
This is testimony about the traffic study.
The entire
This is,
traffic
you know,
study is. in
Due
the record.
process requires that we have an opportunity to have our
Mr. Baird,
expert here also,
Mr. Mayor.
who also testified.
Mr. Baird,
I'm just making my objection for the record.
Okay.
is the traffic study in the record below?
Traffic study is, so they can consider the traffic study. They can't consider new testimony from the applicant's traffic engineer about the study, which is what's going on now.
Fair enough.
And I concur.
For the record.
I'm asking, yeah, I'm
we
looking
asked
to you.
For reasonable interpretations of what was presented in the record below.
Okay.
And if that's what your questions are about, traffic study that was presented below, that's part of the record.
Say the first part again. Ask her for explanation of the.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Let's approach with caution. Make sure it's to the record below.
I'm asking a clarifying question.
Absolutely.
Does your traffic study that's in the record below involve any assumptions?
Can you That's kind of a broad question. Assumptions in what regard? I mean, I did everything based on technical information that I get from the county as far as trip generation rates and pass-by trips. Distribution, I did based on area-wide volumes that are on the
Looking
road.
for a yes or no answer. Does it involve any assumptions?
I guess with distribution, there would be some to analyze the traffic patterns that are out there. I don't know if it's really an assumption though. I take what I know and how I deal with traffic, and I apply that to the information that I get out of sources from DOT and traffic counts. So I'm not really assuming anything. I'm just using my engineering judgment.
Any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, Mayor,
Sure.
if I might, there's some folks here, I think, who are a bit confused about the turning in cards for public comment. I think some folks would like to make some public comment. They just missed that opportunity. I think they got a little confused. So allow them.
Right now, you understand that public comment is not testimony. It's a statement of your desires or lack of desire, but we cannot consider it with you have to understand, there's 4 people here that we're doing our best. In terms of this is quasi judicial and very important. So we look for guidance, but we also look for a little patience. So does anyone have an objection if the people want to, assuming that understand that it's not testimony, it's not to be considered in our decision tonight? Would you still like to make a comment, anyone? Okay, you need to fill out a blue card. Back there. Whew. I have a question for Mr. Seymour. I'll wait for for Dr. Munchcliffe. I have a couple questions. And I have a couple questions for staff.
Yes, ma'am.
There was testimony that the traffic level is F now.
No, I don't believe that the testimony that was referenced about the level of service F was, I believe, the intersection of Barnett and 10th Avenue.
10, right, so it's
Correct.
F. It is currently F.
No,
It's currently what?
E. The traffic study shows that it's currently E and it will remain at E.
I thought I heard F, okay.
No, I think somebody did say it was after, I believe that was a mistake.
Oh, okay.
It was utilizing the previous traffic study, which is, I think, why Commissioner Stokes was asking the question
Oh,
about the
okay.
different traffic studies.
Okay, thank you. Was there any consideration given to, and again, I have to, disclose, I have 4 dogs and a lot of cats, so I'm at Dr. Clifford's office quite often, and it's hard to get out. Was there any consideration, and I know I can't use that in my deliberations, I understand that, but was there any consideration to putting in a right turn lane there? It's a
Yes.
disaster right now.
So believe it or not, this is not testimony that was there. There was a discussion of the right turn lane and it was considered, but the why was not really gotten into. So I can answer that because I do know the answer from Ms. Bernstein, but it wasn't in the record, but it was in the record that it was considered and it didn't meet the technical requirements. So there's certain,
All right,
they're
be
just
careful.
certain, yeah, I'm being very vague on purpose. There was
Whose
certain traffic
whose requirements did they not meet?
Their traffic engineering requirements and
Of the county of,
there's I think it's ITE, which is the
Okay.
Internet Institute of Traffic Engineers, and then the county also does studies.
was there any consideration given to, at the court below, at the venue below, of not having an exit on Barnett Drive? Of limiting it to 10th Avenue North?
No, the discussion was you can't not have an exit onto Barnett Drive because the fuel trucks couldn't circulate the site. So there was testimony about the circulation, which is why there is a right in, right out only, as opposed to having nothing.
So how will a fuel truck get in? Off
I
of
don't have
10th?
this.
Is it, off of 10th?
I think so.
I think it comes in off of 10th and then
Out
out.
on Barnett?
Yeah. Is it not? I don't remember. So I can,
May
hold
I
on.
interject?
Well, no,
Hold on a
ask,
second.
Mr. Malafato, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, if Lisa knows the answer directly, she can answer.
Was this
I don't remember.
discussed at the meeting below?
I don't
Is it
remember.
part of the record below?
That's part of the plan.
There's a truck circulation plan.
Right.
So it probably was.
As I recall, the conversation was that the fuel trucks would follow a similar route, that they would go to Detroit, they would come across, and they would go down Barnett, and then they would enter from Barnett, a right in, and they would make a right out. I mean, this is correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall that was one of the options.
Could you say that again?
Yeah, like it's kind of similar to like the bus pattern is to come in on a road.
On Detroit.
Go down Barnett and then come in, and then the curb would be a mountable curb. The right in and right out would be a mountable curb, not mountable necessarily for a car, but mountable for a truck. And then they would be a right turn out onto 10th.
Could that exit entrance be restricted to just the fuel trucks?
I don't know that you actually would want to. Theoretically, if there was, I don't know about design, you'd have to figure out design. But what you would do is you'd be putting everybody now at that intersection instead of people who would be coming down, go in, and then go back out to 10th without touching that intersection to make that right. So it actually puts more traffic on that intersection. Again, I'm trying to,
Right.
I don't think that was fully vetted. There was discussion of that intersection at length, but there wasn't a discussion about more than there was discussion of the right in, right out, but nothing beyond that from not being able to leave the site.
It looks like there was discussion about a potential signal at that intersection,
Yes, I recall that as well.
but that went, I think it said that the city should be paying for that, but that's not even a city road.
So no, it wouldn't say the city. It would have, if it's, so the way signals work is legally, if they're warranted, then they can be put in. There has to be a warrant study done. So crashes, for instance, the crash data, by the way, that was not at the intersection. There were actually 3 at the intersection in the evidence. So they look at that crash data. The total of 69 over that time period was actually a strike. I can't remember if it was
1,000
half a mile or a mile.
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet. So they look at the intersection crash data, which was 3, which doesn't get you to the warrant. So the light isn't warranted. So you can't put the light in now.
When the commission remanded this back, were there any changes in or maybe the staff question, what if any changes were there between what was submitted and remanded and then what was brought back? And I'll ask any of the attorneys for the answer to that question, or the staff.
As far as I'm aware, the application has not been fundamentally changed or materially changed since it was originally sent to the Planning and Zoning Board, except for the discussion about the additional condition that the Planning and Zoning Board placed on the project twice. And that was to coordinate with Palm Beach County, the city, and the school board to improve pedestrian safety for the children at the intersection of Barnett and 10th, which actually does have a signal.
Right.
Many of us have driven through that signal. And it's green and stop and it's red.
And so it was, I'm just trying to get the procedure down. It was approved, but then it was remanded by the commission. And nothing changed. And now it's before us again,
Right.
before us.
So
Well, what's changed is there was competent substantial evidence presented by our 2 experts at the second hearing. That's what you heard about tonight. The testimony that I recited and Mr. Malafato recited, that they recited to the Planning and Zoning Board.
That was not at the first
What the
hearing.
Planning and Zoning Board just rubber stamped the first approval, despite all of that.
And we
That's
understand
why
this is
we
argument.
focus
We
on-
understand it's argument.
That's why we focused on careful consideration.
Okay.
Because that's evidence that there was no careful consideration. It's evidence that, oh, they're back, boom.
This is a question for the attorneys, I think. What is the effect of if the appeal to the 15th is, affirmed or denied? What happens if the variance is remanded back, or tell me about that? What happens to the plan?
nothing. So if I should let Christie answer. So the short version of it is, all they can do is send it back. They can't say it was wrong.
Right.
And then it would be another hearing before the Planning and Zoning Board. And there would be new evidence to go through that process, if
Could,
that's what they remanded to.
could the project be done without the variance?
No,
Okay. Could the project be, I mean, I'm trying to be fair here.
It's a vacant site. Could it be done without a variance?
No, that's not the question, Mr. Baird, and I think you understand that. Could it be this specific variance? Could the project be done without this
this
specific?
plan,
This,
specific
yeah, with
project.
the variance for the
no,
town.
it could not.
No.
Okay, so a lot depends on that appeal.
I'm quite confident that we're going to win it, and he's quite confident he's going to win it, so
Hey, listen, we're all
it
there.
does.
I get that. Okay, so, all right, thank you. I have a couple questions for staff. Don't be sorry, I have questions for you. Oh, you're talking, that's fine. There is a talk about the I think it's 75-25 balance. Could you educate us a little bit about that?
Sure.
What that means and how it fits in here?
In preparing the comprehensive plan, change.
Could you take could you stand up? Sorry, you can bring her.
She's pretty.
She's good. Thank you.
Beginning with the modifications and edits and amendments to the future land use element of the comprehensive plan that we began in 2011,
Mhm.
which were adopted in 2012, the mixed-use west future land use district was created.
Right.
Before that, every commercial or mixed-use future land use area in the city had a requirement to be 75% commercial and 25% residential, which
Okay,
was not going to be attainable in the long term or appropriate for our economic development goals, which was more toward housing. So the first thing was to change it, all the mixed use future land use districts to be a mix in area wide to be 75% residential, 25% other uses. But because the city has so many non-conforming lots and smaller lots, which are not conducive for a mixture of uses, we put in the sentence that says a single site does not have to have a mixture of uses.
right.
However, in the LDRs that were adopted in August of 2013, we created use categories. And Lake Worth being unique among other cities, there are probably a number of planning experts who don't agree with how we went about our planning. But that isn't the rule that we have to go by.
Right.
We have classifications of uses, and one is vehicular, where the gas fueling station falls. Restaurants cover commercial, and a retail, which is the convenience store, which we don't even have the convenience store as a use in our table anywhere, is a single destination retail. So on the face of it, under our LDRs, it's a 3-type use project, which is mixed use. But
Okay,
it doesn't have the residential.
right. So was there something that I read, there's a lot to read, that it's not just, okay, well, I think you just answered my question. It's not the area. You can take each parcel doesn't have to have it, but what about does the area not have to have that?
Our goal is for the area to eventually have 75% residential and 25% other uses. But what we're getting into is evidence that was not presented.
No, yeah.
So, I mean, if you want me to editorialize it, you got to consider it, I'll do that.
Right. So what else, one of the concerns that, traffic is obviously the biggest concern. I think light probably is, and what are the operating hours of the store, Mr. Seymour?
It's a 24-hour store.
Okay, thank you. So one of the concerns really seems to be the traffic. And the appellant is saying that this use is going to generate huge amounts of traffic that will be disturbing to, especially Barnett Drive. I have big concerns about Barnett Drive. But in light of the ordinances, in light of our LDRs and our comp plan and everything else, what other uses could there be? I mean, is, in your opinion, as our staff, the gas station, mixed use produces X amount of trips.
Mhm.
In your experience, have you, what other use would trigger in that particular geographical, that site? would produce less or more?
Oh, wow.
I mean, let's talk about
Area
residential,
has the broadest array of uses of any district
right?
or future land use area, because it's west of 95 and it's more suburban, as Aaron mentioned. The intensity of development, if it were office, if it were retail fully, if it were residential, could be very, very large. And the overall number of trips from an office building that could be, I think that site could be almost 75,000 square feet, would far exceed the traffic generation of a 4,000 square foot convenience store and a gas station. If we were to mix the uses, which was also suggested at the hearing, to add residential with the gas station, it would make it just worse because, as was testified by the traffic engineer, most residential uses are generating trips to there that are new and away from there that are new. The pass-through thing is very important in this case because many people who will be going down 10th Avenue are going to stop there because they're already on 10th Avenue,
Going west.
going west or possibly east. They're going to hit other places going east before they get to 7-Eleven, but they may have to make a choice.
I had a question right there. Any other questions? Do people have any other questions?
No, it was part of the, it was mentioned at the planning and zoning that it's challenging because yes, this is going to generate some traffic. We have a traffic study saying that it's not going to be an unreasonable amount of traffic. And then we also have a desire to turn this into a residential or maybe a potentially larger project that would generate even more traffic. So it just seems like there's a lot of conflicting things happening
The important
with
thing
this
to
case.
consider is that it's on the map that was shown. This is on the very eastern edge of the mixed-use west district. Right next to it, across the street, is artisanal industrial zoning. We're already dealing with issues where people don't want to live next to industrial.
Right.
Yeah. And they're going to cut a turn lane off of 10th Avenue North. They're going to invade their property to do that.
It will probably be more significant than that once the county designs the improvements at Avenue from the FDOT improvements back to the canal, the C-51 Keller Canal. That road is anticipated to be 6 lanes with a middle turn lane. That's in the works. When it's going to happen, I don't know.
But they'd have to acquire all that land, the DOT.
A lot of it's already been dedicated or been reserved. There
Oh,
are
from
going
the
to have to be some,
new developments,
well, we've had 2 projects that land that's outside the, again,
the hotel,
no, outside what was discussed.
right?
But there are some eminent domain that probably have to take place, but less than you would think.
Mhm. Mr. Mavoy, do you have a question?
I do. I'm having a little trouble with the idea that people with the level of congestion on 10th, that people would choose when they're backed up car to car to get off and stop and have coffee and then have to get back into that flow. Seems to me there's a lot of assumption in there that people are just going to casually, as if they're driving down a country road and there's nothing else going on. I think I'll pull over and get a cup of coffee and then go on my way to work. That's not the reality of that road. Certainly not during either the morning or the evening rush hours. So I think there's a lot of, I do think there's a lot of assumption there of whether people, you know, they just might stop there on the way because.
What I will say that about that assumption is that most of the businesses that are there now would not have any patronage if they followed that assumption, did not get off the road on the way to or from work.
I mean, you're actually stating an assumption. I mean, you're using a judgment.
Dunkin' Donuts gets lots of traffic from people who get off 10th and get back on 10th to get coffee in the morning and stop there and get donuts in the afternoon. If what you're saying were true, Dunkin' Donuts wouldn't exist there. They'd have no traffic.
All right. Well, that's right. So there's 14 pumps, 7 stations. Is that?
7 pumps, 14 positions. Each pump is a thing.
That's two-sided.
And it has 2 handles. A fueling position is the hand, thing that you stick in your car.
Yeah.
That's a fueling position.
Okay.
So each pump has 2 fueling positions.
One on either side?
Yes.
What a normal person
Okay.
would call 14 pumps. that they happen to come out
14
of the
nozzles
same.
you can put in your car. How about that?
That's very good, thank you. Oh, this is, all right,
I have another question.
sure.
Yeah. Do I understand correctly that the likely pathway of the fuel trucks is to go westbound on 10th, north on Detroit, near the school, and come back south on Barnett and turn right into the station?
That was discussed at both the staff's level and at the planning and zoning board. That would be the preferred entrance to the fueling trucks to take.
And when they come out, most likely they need to get back on 95. So they would need to be going eastbound coming out of it.
I could not make that assumption.
Right, and that would be down Barnett. Okay.
And do we know what time, like, are they do fuel trucks typically come and go during the school hours? Do we know that, or
I wouldn't
I don't know
know.
that?
But a fuel truck doesn't just leave wherever it picked up the fuel and go to one gas station, dump off gas and go back to wherever it came to get the gas. It goes to multiple stops.
Right. Which
So
is,
that it could in theory occur at various times during the day or evening.
Any other questions? No other questions? Okay,
is it correct that if somebody did get off of 95, let's say they were southbound on 95, they get off the 10th Avenue exit, they Barnett, they're going that way. Or no, I guess they do this turn lane. Now they got to get back onto 95 southbound, so they've got to leave this station eastbound, correct? If, assuming that they were coming off of 95.
Make a right turn out onto Barnett and go to the light and make a left.
Yeah, they're not gonna go do a U-turn, like go down and enter traffic.
But I thought there was discouragement of them going out Barnett, the
No.
right
Only
in.
allowed to make a right turn out of Barnett, onto Barnett.
Andrew, can you put the site plan up in my presentation?
So if the traffic's backed up on Barnett, that person is gonna be sitting there waiting for their turn to get in onto Barnett. If they're not, I don't know, it seems like they're gonna have to wait. They're not gonna be able to like go in and like back it all the way up because they're gonna have a very narrow area to be able to turn and wait. So it's not like 10 cars are gonna come in at once out of that gas station and back up onto Barnett.
no, but I mean, oftentimes, you know, we're
That area gets backed up.
very backed up.
And the idea that people would try to come out of the station and go eastbound on 10th, crossing the traffic.
No, that's not, they're not gonna do that.
One of the things that we are facing that is troubling to us is that essentially the city's been told by the county, by DOT, whoever has an opinion about it that has jurisdiction over us, is that 10th Avenue North is a terrible drive. It's backed up and there's nothing we can do about it until we widen it to 6 lanes. So we have little control over it. I'm just talking about, you know, we are stuck in a real rough position because although I might think common sense would dictate that this is all way too much for 10th Avenue North. Just practically speaking, it's horrible. But we are stuck with we're not stuck, but we are facing the fact that the county has, in fact, their official stand is, it's a shame, but it is what it is, and we approve it, which, you know, boggles my mind a little bit. We're just like adding level on level on level, but that's not what we're considering today. What we're considering today, and actually, I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to ask our city attorney. Miss, would you come up and give us a little background as to what we're doing here, just to help us? No, I mean, I'm being serious. I mean, just, you know, in terms of.
Right. So as the appellate body, you are considering the record below. And what your consideration is was there substantial competent evidence presented in the record below to support that they've met all of the conditions and criteria laid out in staff report for this project to be approved under the city's current regulations. And I think Mr. Seymour pointed out the issue. You may disagree with this project. You may agree that there's too much traffic already on 10th Avenue, but your role is to look at the record below and was substantial competent evidence presented to planning and zoning that says this project checks off all the boxes.
Even if, as we read the record, so just to help people, the scales are sort of tipped in the favor of the applicant, not the appellant, the applicant. Because,
Correct.
okay, so even if, as we read through the record, and I'm trying to be as articulate as I can, even if we read through the record and find compelling evidence to the contrary,
Correct.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing here, that what we're doing, we are very limited
Yes, you will.
in the sense that if there's an argument that says, and correct me if I'm wrong, if the planning and zoning board had something substantially competent to base their decision to approve it, it's not our job to second guess what they did. It's our job to determine whether or not substantial competent evidence was presented. Am I
That's
correct?
That's correct.
Can I ask a clarifying question? If competent substantial evidence was presented that suggests that approving it was not a good idea, can that be considered?
Well,
That's the problem.
not a good idea is really outside of what you're considering. What you're looking at, was there substantial competent evidence? So there's been a lot of discussion at the record below and here tonight about the traffic report. And you heard about the applicant's traffic engineer. If you found that that wasn't substantial competent evidence to meet the criteria in the city's code regarding traffic, then that's something for you to consider. But whether you personally disagree with it or not is not really something that this body is supposed to consider. You're purely focusing on the substantial competent evidence presented below and whether or not it satisfied the criteria.
So I have a question about policy 2.1.4.3. The heavy traffic generating land uses shall be carefully considered before permitting along 10th Avenue immediately west of 985. So it just seems like a very vague, weird, phrase. That's not very helpful for me right now, trying to figure out, did we have, substantial evidence that addressing this?
And what's interesting, of course, Mr. Waters can speak to this as well, is this is a conditional use. And with conditional use is the criteria is in the planning and zoning report of the criteria you have to satisfy for conditional use. So that language from the comp plan tracks the conditional use in your land, your LDRs, so that when it's this type of use, careful consideration is built into your conditional use. So they have to go through that criteria and make sure all the criteria is met. If it wasn't a conditional use, there's an argument that there wasn't careful consideration.
So there's certain criteria, and those have been checked. Those boxes have been checked.
Staff's analysis was
is
that they were met. Planning and zoning, by approving the project, has said those criteria have been met for the conditional use.
Is this use considered a heavy generating land use, heavy traffic generator?
We have two ways of doing that. One is based on the size of the project, and then also the type. Based on the size, it's actually a medium intensity use. The vehicular one, some could argue that the gas station is a higher intensity traffic generator, but it's not an overly large gas facility, for lack of a better way to put it, with the 7 pumps and the 14 nozzles.
Okay. That didn't really answer my question. I have to be honest.
There's not in our code, it doesn't
We
say
don't have a,
these X, Y, and Z.
okay, I know,
are
that's what I was
happening.
asking.
Yeah, so we have high intensity and medium intensity. This is
Okay.
medium intensity.
So when we have all these boxes that were being checked, was it based, so this says heavy traffic generating land uses shall be carefully considered. Did you consider this did you give this the same level of consideration that you would a heavily trafficked use? Even though it's considered a medium, you gave it the consideration of a heavy.
Because most vehicular uses in our code, not all, but most, there's very few that are permitted by right. Most are considered conditional uses, especially by the, our development pattern tends to be outside of this area, tends to be more traditional urbanism. So like, especially a gas station, we're going to want it to go forward.
So the conditions of approval are mostly infrastructure.
Yeah, they're
Sidewalk.
infrastructure, traffic.
Right. Water and sewer.
Yes. There was a specific landscape condition. We wanted to see on the landscape plan that came in for permit that the air and vacuum mechanical equipment would be extremely well screened. We wanted some additional information on signage at permit. We said that there would be no outdoor display of any kind, which was an additional condition that outdoor display might be permitted, but it's not. It's expressly prohibited in the development order. It keeps things tidier. And
What about signage? Is it a monument sign or a?
it is a monument sign, and there's some building sign. And then we also required modifications to the front facade to add additional fenestration. And we also required as a planning condition, a non-infrastructure condition would be that they need to conform to the conditions and recommendations in the TPS letter, which include the write-in and write-out on Barnett with the mountable curb for the traffic or for the
If you're not familiar with the term fenestration, we would require more glass
windows.
glazing on the.
Sorry.
I mean, one thing about, and this is completely off topic, but convenience stores have a tendency to like overload their windows with signage. It's 25% they're allowed.
20, I believe it's in the code that 25% of the glazed area of a store can have display in it. PVSO would like us to lower that number. I'm told to try that.
Okay.
And we haven't tackled that. We'll probably bring that to you for a policy issue.
At some point.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Klepfer has filled out a blue card and I'd like to call him up now.
Excuse me, Mayor, excuse me.
Sure.
Before that, can I address the question raised by Commissioner McCoy? Because I think I've got a different perspective than was presented by the city attorney.
Sure.
Thank you.
Are there more cards?
So Commissioner McCoy, you had asked whether or not if there was competent substantial evidence, could you, I think what you're trying to say, could that be sufficient to overturn the approval, prior approval? And the city attorney, and I think as far as she said, as far as she went was correct. If there's competent substantial evidence supporting the project, then it should be approved. But if competent substantial evidence was also presented to show that the project should be denied, and I think that was presented by Mr. Whiteford and Mr. Tefi on the traffic, you could rely on that and you can pay careful consideration of that. And if based on that, if there's competent substantial evidence, and we believe there was, to overturn this project or to deny the project initially, now overturn it, I think it's within your province to do that. I just wanted to get that on the record so you could understand.
But the board did approve it.
They did approve it, but you could overturn that by looking at whether or not they were in error by not considering the competent substantial evidence presented in opposition to the project.
But I would think that you would have to assume that they did consider all the evidence and made a decision.
The question in my mind, and I would just like to go on the record, that we're being asked to make pretty sophisticated legal evaluations at $24,000 a year. When you want me to make these kind of evaluations, you need to up the salary a whole lot and send the legal degree.
You have another.
This is,
All right. Thank you.
okay, now I'd like to follow a little bit because I find this pretty upsetting. If
I don't know that this is the form to do that, though.
I would like the floor. If the structure of government is such that you have boards appointed by a commission to do the first level of review. And then you have an elected board to do a second level of review. And the rule is, well, the second board can only come to the same conclusion as the first board. Then what's the point of bringing it to us? I would submit, and yes, you did understand my question correctly. If there is competent and substantial evidence, not just the evidence presented by one side, but presented by both sides, I believe we should be allowed to, and it was presented before. It seems very reasonable that if the whole purpose of having two levels is that we should be able to consider the whole works. Is that, if it was previously in the record, obviously anything presented new is off limits.
I agree with you, and of course, Mrs. Sue is going to disagree with me in a moment, but I agree with you, and I think you're correct.
I think it's true, but like, if they presented evidence and we feel like the planning and zoning board ignored that evidence, making their decision, then that's our job to step in and say, wait a minute, it looks like they maybe have some bias, or maybe they overstepped or overreached, or they ignored something.
But how do you determine that?
So.
Yeah, I can't determine whether they ignored, and I'm not interested in trying to do it.
I think that this conversation is more of a policy consideration, and that we should probably take this to a different form. I understand your frustration. I think we all are feeling it. And I think we're starting to discuss some alternatives to this process, which I think we'll all be happy about. But here we are tonight. And, the level of review, what's the standard of review? And I see Dr. Klipfer has some more cards. Okay. We're going to do very brief public comment, but I just have to say, what is our standard of review?
Your Honor, the standard of review is, was there
Competent.
substantial competent evidence below to support the planning and zoning decision?
Okay, thank you.
That's what it is.
Okay, Dr. Klepfer? I have one card from Dr. Klepfer, and we're being a little lenient tonight.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes, but
Thank you.
in the meantime, I had received one comment also, so I'll read it after they're finished.
We have 3 cards up here. Dr.
Okay, and
Klepfer-
I have one. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 4 cards up here.
Okay.
Dr. Klepfer.
It's 2 minutes. Okay. Well, I've been traveling that road for 18 years. So, just a quick note about what the engineer said about the middle lane. There is no middle lane on 10th Avenue in front of the property. There is a turn lane that goes going east, and you turn left on the Barnett from that lane. So if people are going to start coming out of their east, they're going to take up that lane for people who are trying to go left on Barnett. Pretty simple. Also, peak times. You mentioned 7 to 9. I don't know if she's been there 7 to 9 or she's been there from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. You want to be there. There's nowhere to go except east and west. There's 2 lanes. I went to Purdue and I can count to 2. There's 2 lanes going east, 2 lanes going west. There's no room. In the morning time, traffic backs up almost from 95 to the railroad tracks going west in the morning. People are trying to get on 95. And also, some of them are continuing west on 10th Avenue. It's a joke. Now we're talking about shoving these people this way on the 10th Avenue again, and they're trying to get on Barnett and go left. There's not even a turn lane on Barnett yet to turn left and go east from Barnett, head towards 95. Now they changed the lights. The lights have changed, okay, on 10th Avenue. They're trying to get the flow of traffic better. You can get out on Barnett, but you're going to sit there and wait another 10 minutes before you can turn anywhere. Go straight or go north, say, or north on 95. So it's not good. I've traveled back and forth forever, 18 years. I've done house calls. I don't travel 10th Avenue. There's good reason why. It's impossible. It's not got any better with Walmart out there. I can tell you that. That's a couple, 200-300 car trips a year, or every 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes coming in and out of there. So you guys, I don't know where these traffic studies are coming from, but if she doesn't know where the turn lane is, then we got a problem. I'm all about prevention. It's all about safety. It's all about the kids. We're trying to protect them. We're talking about herds of kids coming out of there. Okay.
Your 2 minutes is up, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Klepfer.
Safety, crime, traffic, common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hyatt?
Madam Mayor, I do have a question. Mr. Hyde is represented, he is one of the appellants.
Right.
So he would not
He's
be.
been able to speak through
Right,
his,
through his
right.
counsel, so he would not be.
So sorry, Mr. Hyatt. Your attorney has spoken for you.
There are also members of the public.
Yeah, I filed a public comment card and I was on the list today when Al sent the information in.
It was on the list as a list of witnesses and represented, so as a list of people, the party.
Who sworn, that's,
I mean, Your Honor.
I'm looking for
Right,
guidance.
if we're gonna open public comment, then we have to open it to the applicant for all of this folks to testify. And I think the purpose is truly to have public who would not be providing testimony to be allowed to come and comment, not the parties.
And he's a party.
He's a party.
Okay. All right. I'm going to follow your advice. Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Is Mr. Schmidt a party? Mr. Schmidt's a party. Is Mr. Gill a party? Okay. Madam Clerk.
Okay, I have a letter from James Sejmeria. I am the co-owner and director of Electric Connections, a family-owned and operated business in Lake Worth for approximately 25 years with over 300 employees. Our principal address is 1100 Barnett Drive, Lake Worth, which is less than 150 feet from the subject site. My family and I have been following the development pertaining to this site on the northwest corner of Barnett and 10th Avenue North. Our understanding is that there is an application for a proposed 7-Eleven that was recently approved by the Planning and Zoning Board. The approval is exciting news. The site has been sitting vacant for almost 2 years. Adding an investment of such sort to the area is very much needed and welcomed. This would be a great amenity to all of us who work and live here. Personally, this will allow my employees to have easy access to fuel, a convenience store, and food without having to drive on 10th Avenue North. Currently, our fleet of work trucks travel west on 10th Avenue North to fuel up and then back east to access I-95. For the community, a corporation that is willing to invest in the city of Lake Worth while providing new amenities and services is a great thing. This city needs it. Also, a well-lit, popular venue with strong security protocol is also a big plus. My family and I are fully supportive of this project and hope this moves forward. I am available should you have questions. And I may have ruined his name and I apologize, but that's the end of that comment.
Perhaps you could just spell it for the record.
Sure, it's Jason SJAARDEMA. And there is no address on this, but he gave his address, 1100 Barnett Drive. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's the timer. It always sounds like a
Fire alarm.
fire alarm. Okay, so we have, we are going
I think Commissioner Robinson wanted.
to, Commissioner Robinson, do you have
Red light on
or a
all that.
motion? Do we have a motion or a
Do you have
comment?
a comment?
Well, either during the motion or this is not an easy decision. It was obviously not an easy decision for planning and zoning twice, but they did approve the project twice. We're not going to get into the conditional uses that we would like. All we're doing is deciding that the people of planning and zoning exercised careful consideration twice to decide to move this project forward. It's problematic, but I'm going to say acceptable, as a lot of projects aren't perfect, but they're good. So I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion, but
And thank you. I'm not going to make a motion, but I have to just say something, we're obviously in this is a horrible position for us to be in because we know the reality of the traffic on 10th Avenue North. However, our job is not really to second guess. We may not agree with it in terms of practically speaking, I certainly don't, but it is not our job, and correct me if I'm wrong, When I appeal something to the fourth, they don't say, well, I mean, it's a very, very narrow review. You have to find that the judge in that case made fundamental error, like really messed it up, that no reasonable person could come to that decision. So our hands in many ways are tied. And I understand the frustration.
And I don't accept it.
Well, you're here and these
It's
are
not
the-
just frustration,
It's the rules.
our job is to be elected officials who look out for the well-being of the community. And if there's a range of competent and substantial evidence that's presented, and some of it clearly by professional people with a lot of experience, particularly experience here, say that, this does not meet some of the criteria, and I don't know the zoning numbers and so on, but it doesn't, then I believe we are allowed to take that into consideration
I think so.
and
too.
should.
We heard from, there are a lot of checks and balances. Traffic is an issue, right? If we would never be able to develop anything on 10th Avenue. We'd have to turn down every single project that came before us because there's not a single project that's going to go up there that's not going to have at least one more car added to the road.
And so
And-
far, we've approved every single one on the argument that, well, we can't do anything.
Well, there's
So-
we've approved one.
It's,
And we
I'm
can't do
looking for
anything.
legal advice here. Are we allowed to say, we're going to just not approve any project that comes before us in this manner that is going to generate
That's-
any more traffic on that road?
That's,
And I think what the discussion was below was if you have a project that's permitted by right, it may generate more trips.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you're pointing out a very obvious issue that everybody knows the traffic issues, but you have county standards, you have FDOT saying things, you have the analysis that the traffic engineer provided that really sets you guys into a very tough position because you know the reality of it, but what they base their decisions on doesn't necessarily reflect that reality. But that was the evidence presented below, and you have the traffic study that was approved by the county.
do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to uphold the planning and zoning decision.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Nay.
opposed? Nay, okay. This may be the last one we do. Let's just say that.
It's a,
We need to act quickly.
it's a terrible
It's-
thing to,
Yeah.
to accept things that you don't like.
Yeah.
Right, I mean,
but
we
that
are being told, yeah, we don't get to second guess what they did. We don't like it, but we don't get to second guess it.
Then I would choose to do in the future what one of my colleagues did, which is simply not be here.
Well, she's her birthday. She's not,
Yeah.
we're looking at other options for this.
Well, I would want to point out that planning and zoning's vote wasn't unanimous
Yeah,
twice.
be good neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you for your.
Well, there has to be a change in the policy, the way that FDOT and the